half-beings. Your true lives have begun. It is time to make a gift of yourselves. They who hunt have come to claim what has always been theirs since the time of the blood mind. Hello to another short story. Today, I have something very, very special for you, as you might have guessed by the intro. Today's story is not only an original story by a contemporary author, it is also a story in the tradition of the classic weird tale. It has science fiction elements, it has monsters and chess. And I have to say that I was really, really surprised by the twist ending, and I'm curious if you are as well, so please let me know if you expected this ending. The story was written by none other than the wonderful Mr. Stephen Sinclair. Thank you so much, Stephen, for sending the story. I couldn't wait to read and post it, and here we go. So lean back, enjoy The Seeker's Gambit by Stephen Sinclair. The old man had been teaching the young man to play chess. They had been meeting regularly now for a couple of days a week for a few months, usually in the same cafe in the town centre. Although they had now progressed to the old man's home. This both surprised and pleased the old man, surprised him for several reasons. Firstly, because of the ease with which the acquaintance had been struck up. Even when young, the old man had been shy and awkward around people. If he was honest, often even fearful of them. He had also been a bit taken aback when the young man, who was well-spoken and always wore what were obviously very expensive dark suits, set off by blindingly white shirts and red ties, told him he had never played, didn't even know the rules. It struck him as rather strange, but he told himself, "You're old enough to know the world's a strange place." He supposed the young man would be considered handsome by many, although he had never been inclined that way. Sometimes he wondered if his life would have been easier if he had been. Always intimidated by tall, dark, well-made men like this in the past, he now found him easy company. And the old man had been very lonely for a long time. What was even more surprising, however, was that they talked about the game. In the old man's experience, whilst many people spoke endlessly, few talked about anything. And when they talked chess, the young man listened avidly. The old man could tell. Not only did the old man enjoy this, but the opportunity to teach the game to someone was even more fulfilling. He had always suspected that if he'd ever been given the opportunity, he would be good at teaching, and it seemed he was. They had first met in the cafe. The old man was sitting alone as usual and reading an old hardback book on chess by Chernev. It had a black chessboard on the front and back cover of the dust jacket, the black and white squares a little faded. The young man had been walking out the door when the book had apparently caught his eye. The speed with which he turned back had startled the old man a little, and there had been something a little disturbing about the focus with which he gazed at the book. But that had only been a passing impression. Soon the young man was sitting with the old man, and they were having a friendly talk. That had been the start. But there was something else that would truly have surprised the old man. The young man was not a human being. His kind had many, many names. Like all their words, the names had multiple meanings and nuances that had built up over the millennia like the layers that build up to make pearls. Most of these associations would have been incomprehensible to the human mind. The simplest rendering in human speech would be, "They who hunt." And they would have considered this hopelessly crude. They did not like crude things. They could have been described as a species of artists or aesthetes. But that word would have, although close, been completely inaccurate, being based on vastly different concepts and needs. At least beyond the most superficial level. However, it is the closest to what they thought themselves to be. It is also not how many of the other sentient beings dwelling within the galactic volume who had had the misfortune to encounter them would have described them. This would have been as monsters, killers, devils. It is an unfortunate fact that predation is a good basis for problem solving, and therefore for high intelligence. Anyway, they who hunt would have laughed. They considered such concepts fit only for those they called muddle-headed filth-grubbers. In other words, omnivores and other half-beings, as they also called all such. Like all pure predators, for they who hunt, the world was composed of success and failure, feelings and emotions, and the known and yet unknown. A scientist was also a hunter, just for different prey. It would have been difficult for a human to understand what they meant by art, but perhaps not impossible, given just how violent those particular omnivores could be. This male, the handsome young man in the expensive-looking suit, was what was known as a seeker. He performed the role which had always existed. Some of those who hunts scientists conjectured that the equivalent role had existed among their primitive ancestors before speciation had even occurred. In common with most of his fellow seekers, he disliked the crudest meaning for what he did, a scout. It was a seeker's task to range far ahead of the pack. Long ago they had flown on their own wings over the plains, forests, and cliffs of the old home world. Now, many millennia later, they ranged ahead through the emptiness of space in single-occupant ships with fusion reactors that powered incredibly efficient warp-drive engines. But the role was the same. Sometimes the seeker made the kill himself, if the game was sick or in form. Often they simply rejoined the main group and guided the others in. At other times, the prey was driven deliberately into the pack's path and ambushed. Yet again he might stay where he was and give howls his fellows could hear over vastly huge distances, and while he stayed, he would harass the game, bleed them so that they were exhausted when the others arrived. Sometimes other strategies were employed. Perhaps the role had originally evolved because the gravity on the home world being slightly less than on Earth, more animals had developed flight, and a useful mutation that gave them an elegant six-limb design. Long ago the role had always been performed exclusively by males, but there had been female seekers now for thousands of years. One of his female litter mates, his favorite sibling as a matter of fact, was also an experienced seeker. He had been on Earth for 20 of the planet's months, his true appearance hidden from the natives by a simple distortion field. For a brief time, in what the locals called a war zone. It had been a disappointing little nest squabble, passing himself off as a sniper. His natural skills had amazed them, disturbed them. Before he left, he had, in the camp of the contemptible faction that had hired him, turned the distortion field off. The screams of terror had been musical. He had torn a dozen of them apart with his bare talons. For a month now he had been in this city on a small island in the heart of the planet's temperate zone, just offshore of a peninsula of the largest continental landmass. Soon now it would be time for him to leave, his decision made, and that decision would be final and absolute. No one would gainsay it. Unlike humans, the alpha males and alpha females of the pack would have correctly considered that questioning the decision of one of their own experienced seekers as a sign of intolerable weakness on their part. It would also have been rude. He was almost sure what that decision was. His ship's AI already made the assessment, but like most organic high-technology using beings, his species had twice nearly met disaster from rebellious AI. The computer was a slave, a cur. It was kept as a kind of idiot savant. The decision was his. If the natives had been a bit more of a challenge, they could have been used as sport. The pack would have deliberately held back from using all its infinitely superior technological power and engaged in an amusing battle. That a few of they who hunt would be killed and injured would have simply added to the thrill. Like any dangerous sport, an element of risk was necessary. But the natives were far too pathetic. The seeker might have also decided on several other options. In practice, however, these were very rare. As he sat in the cafe, the day he'd met the old man, he mused on what would happen when he relayed the planetary coordinates and his decision home. He knew one of the big galactic-class ships would be more than enough, but that had never been the pack's way. They would, instead, come with force overwhelming. He knew that in their own stupid, crude fantasies the natives had considered the eventuality he represented, imagined they could resist. This was, of course, nonsense. against a fully mature Level 3 civilization, one that had begun to confidentially reach out even further. They had no chance. None. How could creatures who had yet even to develop even crude anti-gravity tech and who still burned fossil fuel imagine resistance? Absently he poured the coffee onto the floor. The beverage had disgusting vegetable matter as a base. The humans saw the handsome young man drink some. He mused on what would soon happen. The pandemonium that would break out when the ships were spotted approaching. Teleportation beams would strip the simple and dirty fission bombs out the silos and explode them harmlessly in deep space. Then remove the metal skeletons from inside the ugly crude buildings in the major cities so that they collapsed, their fall into dust and rubble far more pleasing to the eye than they could ever be if left standing. At the same time, anti-gravity pulses would strike the oceans at strategic points. The concussion causing massive tidal waves which would inundate huge stretches of the coastal regions. Of course, the Pack's approach would have already caused large-scale societal collapse. Away from what he had classified the planetary North, the crux of the natives' lives was based on primitive belief in magic, called religion. The Pack had encountered similar things amongst other species of muddleheads. The fact of the approaching fleet's existence would probably cause these beliefs to implode. There was, for example, a major population concentration, far larger than which existed where he was now, which was a spot of not much significance, where the religion seemed to be that they were the Middle Kingdom, the center of existence, because of age and numbers. Once exposed as a lie, the very power of the delusion and its collapse would have catastrophic consequences. But even before this happened, the real operation would have begun. Big, clumsy, but highly efficient robotic drones would land and begin to build factories. The drones would be virtually invulnerable to the natives' weapons not so far removed from black powder projectiles than they believed. Then collection and processing by the same machines. Some areas would be preserved for when the colonists disembarked, for organic farming, hunting preserves. Probably he would designate this island as one. Because he would soon be going home, his thoughts turned to his family. He thought of his sister. The bonds with one's litter mates were sacred. With them you had been blind and helpless in the nest. They alone groomed you, even into advanced old age. His sister's cubs had opened their eyes some time ago. They had reached an especially delightful age, just beyond what was known as nest edge. He imagined their happy yelps of "Dear Uncle," how they would fly down from the perches on new, still unsure little wings. Some, no doubt, running up to him. Perhaps still dropping and lopping on all fours as small children sometimes did. He also got on very well with his father. a scientist, whose latest quarry interested him. Probably after the children went to sleep, all three would sit down and enjoy a glass of fermented blood. The thoughts filled the seeker with feelings of happiness and warm pleasure, and he remembered what one of the old meanings of seeker was, repeated in countless proverbs, poems, and tales. Fly fast, run fast under the trees down the ledges, for he is calling. Now it is time to catch, for we will kill, for he is calling us. Come, my dear brothers, come, my dear sisters, fast, cunning, sure. They who hunt are coming, and see what he has done. This is a worthy ploy, to be told in the evenings over chewed bones long and often, happily. See, for he has driven the game into the pack's path. Soon the blood will gush in freshets. As waters flow strong from the cliffs after the rain, so will the red water of life down our throats, driven by the hearts that now beat wildly to escape us. Now we are on them. They have made themselves a gift for us. Sink in the talons and the fangs, taste the good flesh. They still try to run, they still try to fly, as we eat them alive. See how that back leg gives a delicious twitch? And your father comes and rips it off, and you remember playing safe beside him and a bone he had given you long ago, and you were warm and safe and slept. And your mother comes and rips out the throat with the same jaws she gently carried you, with all the scruff, small and blind, curled. Follow the seeker, you who hunt. The handsome young man, who was not actually human, had looked around him and smiled a charming smile as he remembered the ending of that old poem. Old, before these humans had even existed. It was, of course, follow him who finds the cubs their food. He had been sitting at the back of the cafe. As he got ready to leave the cafe, his thoughts of family had inevitably turned to his younger brother. He decided to sit a little longer. As always, the thoughts of his dead brother were both sad and disturbing. The young male had been from his mother's second litter, those who were often called, he thought a little unfairly, the pampered second. From the beginning, they had shared a bond, second only to what he felt for his sister. The male had, from the beginning, shown promise as a seeker. It was unusual that there be three such in his family, who tended to be more stay-at-home types. But it was not to be. His brother had joined the ranks of those known as the defeated. Inside the heads of all they who hunt were two minds. They were not half beings like these humans The beauty and elegance of the arrangement was sometimes represented by a white and black circle, shapes arranged in a concentric pattern, more often alternating squares of the same color. His mind went over what all cubs were taught from earliest childhood. In the beginning was blood mind. Blood mind was pure. It was the desire to hunt and kill. It was uncorrupted, even by the need for food. It was enough. It thought, but didn't know it was thinking. It was innocent. But always secretly it had a litter mate, a little runt unseen. This was Stone Mind. Stone Mind knew he was thinking. He was not innocent. He came to be called this because the people first took up stones as the first tools. They found they could drop stones on the game and kill them or drive them over cliffs. And they found they could make better talons with the edges of flat stones. And Stone Mind grew. The people found they could block the game that only go on foot into narrow valleys with piles of stone and wood, and then they began to slay the false, they who hunt, the other living things who wanted to eat the game, in the sealed-in places, and the people began to put the things the game wanted to eat piled up in places to tempt them into traps, and soon they began to grow those things so that they could keep some of the game always alive. And they were no longer afraid of fire. On and on it went, and on for a long time. And Stone Mind grew, until the time of you who have now opened your eyes. And behold, the great ships that cross between the stars, you, little one, are one of they who hunt. And your two minds from what is called a mortal emergent soul. And forever and always Blood Mind has been the one who has driven his litter mate Stone Mind on, and they help one another. So it shall ever be. Of course they didn't tell children about the defeated. The only thing worse socially than suggesting that a pack could subsist on synthetic meat was to make use of the word mad in relation to the defeated, or even admit they existed any more than was necessary. For sometimes something went wrong. An individual's mind would fight, tear themselves and their unfortunate owner apart. This had happened to his brother. Slowly the young male had started to do and say things that made no sense. Slowly it built, until the terrible day his brother had begun to scream with a terrible, apparently sourceless anguish. He had snatched one of his own blind, unweaned cubs, so young their wings were still webbed to their backs, out their nest, screaming, "How can we? How can we? What if these were?" He went on to say disgusting, obscene things that made no good sense, and then his mate could stand no more. All females were naturally aggressive around unweaned cubs. She snatched her baby to safety away from the screaming, weeping wretch who had once been her fine mate and torn out his brother's throat. He could still hear his mother and father's howls of grief, mixed with his and his siblings. Nobody blamed the young mother. Later his mother said she would have done the same. It only happened very rarely. Perhaps fewer that 1 in 20 cubs grew up to become the defeated. It was also something that people didn't talk about, but always there. In healthy people, a small degree of dissonance always existed between stone mind and blood mind. It was considered a spur towards creativity. Not for nothing was stone mind sometimes called the son of sorrow. The seeker had got up and begun to walk out. The handsome young man's face had assumed such a look of demonic rage that a group of adolescent human females who were about to enter had turned and run. It only lasted for seconds. Later, one of them had tearfully told her mother, "It was like one of those tigers you see on the internet had put on a suit, Mum." That had been when the seeker had seen the book. The AI had warned him it would be anachronistic for a male of his age and apparent social status to not know the game. But he'd given an internal snarl and shut it off. From the moment abstract strategic war game was mentioned, he'd been interested. He also expected to be disappointed. It would inevitably be primitive and soon played out, solved. He had been very surprised. Now he sat in the old ape's home, listening to him talk over a chessboard. Idly the young man took up a knight and glanced at it. The seeker had discovered he liked to touch the pieces. He had already given them his own analogous names. The knights, for example, were young males, very agile but limited strength. The pawns were, of course, cubs. Another, of course, were the rooks. Seekers. The old ape was saying, "Of course, the game's seen as either the preserve of social misfits and the proverbial loner, or it's viewed as the epitome of urbane sophistication and intellectualism. Personally, I think there's a bit of truth in those views, but it's not what chess really is." The seeker sensed he was being invited to ask a question. He put the knight down and linked his fingers thoughtfully under his chin. "So, what do you think chess is?" he asked. The seeker found that part of him found the old man's company amusing. Even as he mused, a blood-mind thought rose. He saw himself slash the human's face open with his talons. This was simply a wholesome reflex, and he dismissed it. He had wondered what the man would think he saw if he turned off the distortion field. Because of convergence, evolution solved problems in similar ways all over the universe. He asked the AI, and it fed him images. The old man would see a face that was covered in dappled grey and brown things that were neither a reptile's scales nor a bird's feathers, but rather more like those things than fur. A face that resembled a cross between a huge bat and a great bird of prey. He would stare into the eyes that would evoke thoughts of a shark's eyes. Briefly, the seeker saw an image of something that sat on the stump of a tree on a wind-swept moor, seeming almost part of the stump. That sat very still. A buzzard. But this, he thought, is a buzzard with arms that end in taloned hands with two fully opposable thumbs, and legs with the same. And my wings are more like these bat wings. The old man answered. The polite answer is, chess is a search for truth. But I've always thought that was a bit like saying hunting is the search for animals. The old man laughed quietly. What I would say is that the game's the distillation of pure cruelty. And to people who say that it's also beautiful, I would say that a tiger and a lion, or my old tomcat, are beautiful. The handsome young man regarded the old man intently. His stare level, a strange smile on his lips. Although the old man liked him, he sometimes found him a little unnerving. The old man looked down at the board. The young man spoke quietly in his fine, cultivated voice. But as you've explained, this is a game of total knowledge. Hunting involves an element of random chance. But don't forget, that's part of what's so wonderful about the game. Instead of chance, as the roll of the dice or the turn of the card, the random factor is what the player really takes to the table. One player might not be feeling his best, nor slept or something. They play badly. In this game of total knowledge, that's more like what happens in a real hunt than in something like card games, and as in the real world, the rules of chess don't change. Just as the rules of physics don't. Only my opinion, of course. The old man had already said that he sometimes thought that he hated the game as much as he loved it, but was always compelled to come back. The seeker instinctively understood this. It was like what his kind called the great sadness, the truth that most hunts end in failure. The seeker considered. As always, the old human's answers surprised him, just as this game surprised him very much. He had used the AI and given the subject a cursory study. Time was not so much a factor for learning things with him as for humans. They who hunt valued intensity of study. He had been surprised and fixated upon the number of possible positions in the game. At first, he had even suspected the AI of malfunctioning. It hadn't. The seeker stroked the old man's cat, who lay purringly asleep on his lap. He had known instantly it was a domesticated ambush predator when he'd first seen it. Normally, quadrupeds looked somewhat lopsided to him. Somehow, this one was elegant. The little beast was almost pure blood mind, its trace of stone mind only making its antics more endearing. He ordered a standard preservation order. Also, he'd been delighted that according to the AI, some megafauna existed in the genus. He had already sent some drones to retrieve specimens. He had later changed the preservation order on the cat to one of recommendation of household domestication within the Empire, augmentation for gravity variations minor. He had decided to present some of his sister's cubs. He imagined their happy cries of glee when they released suitable games for it to devour. He would also, he decided, give his father some of the megafauna called lions for release inside an enclosure in the estate, knowing full well the old male would also enjoy the small ones, although he would deny this. He glanced again at the chessboard, and he remembered the last game they had played. He had managed to carry out something the old man called a revealed attack, swept his bishop over to take pawn and attack a rook. The move had uncovered an attack on the old man's queen, who was pinned in front of his king, and inside the seeker's mind there had been a moment of pure harmony. Blood mind and stone mind had become one. It was the harmony of what they who hunt called art. He had successfully caught. He was going to bring this game into the world of the Empire. He hoped it would be good for certain things. He was sure it would be popular. He told the old man that it was time for him to go, that he was leaving on business and wouldn't be back. He knew more about the old muddleheads kind than it ever would itself. There had, for example, been 12 members of its taxonomic tribe alive on this one planet at one time. One of them intellectually superior to this one. The old humans kind had killed or horribly hybridized all the others away. Then the seeker remembered the opening the old man had used, offered a pawn to draw one of his away from the center. Apparently it was called the Old Benoni, and he asked what it meant. Hebrew, I think, said the old man. Means son of sorrow, apparently. The seeker made his decision. Planetary coordinates and subfile, designation, preservation order. World to be preserved for aesthetic reasons. Probable future value to the Empire in view of a specific set of artifacts highly likely to be of high significance to they who hunt. Value of an artistic nature.